All right, everybody. Welcome back to the Showing Up to Your Life podcast and YouTube channel. My name is Art Burns, and I'm wishing you the best day today. Hope you're all doing great. It's Monday, and I hope that you all had a wonderful weekend. And I hope that as Monday morning has settled in and is taking root in your day and your life, I hope that you're able to meet things on Monday morning with a measure of acceptance and a measure of presence and some compassion and most of all curiosity about, not just curiosity about what's happening around us, but curiosity about how we think about what's happening around us. This is so key and so crucial. It's something that we don't normally do, right? We have thoughts about things, we have feelings about things, we have emotions about things, and we just accept these as just the truth, right? And of course, one of the things I invite you to do is to accept, but that is accept, what is happening and what is arising for you right now. Not accepting it in a sense of defeat, right? But instead acceptance in the sense of empowerment, right? Because only through the very basic acceptance of what is happening as it's happening, exactly as it is, only through that mental acceptance of that reality can we ever hope to change anything, right? And so again, a lot of times when we have certain feelings about, say, Monday morning, right, we have a tendency to kind of believe the thoughts that we have about Monday morning, and the belief in those thoughts is what creates the stress and the anxiety and the ill feelings that we might have as we encountered Monday morning. And this is the very source of our suffering, right? So if instead we can be curious about the thoughts that we're having, about the sensations that we're having, about the emotions that we're experiencing as they relate to something like Monday morning or Sunday night or Friday night or anything, whether it's the good or the pleasurable or the displeasurable, right? It's maintaining that curious and sort of unedited, awareness of what it is that we're going through. And that, my friends, is the key to maintaining our happiness through the experiences that we're going through, even if those experiences are something that is not very pleasant, right? Like, yeah, there's nothing wrong with wanting to be with your family the way that you were yesterday on Sunday, but you have to be at work today. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be with your family, right? But it's when we sit here and say, oh, I hate Monday morning. I can't stand this. I really want to be with my family, and I'm not going to be happy until I get to be with my family again next weekend, right? Well, then what we're doing is we're consigning ourselves to a lot of unhappiness that way, right? And so the idea is to say, well, what is it about my feelings about Monday morning that make me feel that that this is so bad, right? Like, what is it that's driving this? Because when we can get to that point of understanding where the thoughts come from, the thoughts that create this sensation that we have about Monday mornings, or again about anything, whether it's the good stuff or the bad stuff, which we shouldn't be judging as good or bad, but it's when we get to the root of why it is that we feel that Monday morning is bad and Sunday afternoon is good. When we can get to that understanding of what it is that makes us believe that, well, that's when we can start to change it, right? And we can realize that a lot of these thoughts and a lot of these emotions that we're having that cause the suffering and the tension in our body, right? A lot of these are very automatic. And that's the point, right? Is that when we're curious about something, right? When we're curious, well, first of all, being curious about something eliminates the judgment of it, right? So you can't be curious about something and at the same time categorize that thing as a bad thing or a good thing, right? So just that's the first step, right? Of not judging things, but that non-judgment comes through the curiosity that I'm talking about, right? And then the next step in this curiosity is to understand, right? It's to gain an understanding of what it is that's driving our feelings and our emotions and our thoughts, right? And again, once we can get into that inception point, right? And we can get into understanding the mechanisms that make that thing happen. That's when we realize, as I started to say a moment ago, that most of these feelings and most of these thoughts that we're having are completely unconscious. We're just going with them, right? Because that's the way it's always been. It's just the way we do things, right? Mondays, everybody hates Mondays, right? So I'm only fitting in, right? Well, the fact of the matter is that you don't have to suffer, right? Like Monday mornings are inevitable in life, right? We all have to deal with them, right? Yeah, you're right. And most of us, yeah, we would rather be hanging out, drinking beer or having a barbecue with our friends on Sunday rather than being at work on Monday, right? And again, there's nothing wrong with that, right? But the fact is that when that sensation, when that understanding, when that view of what is happening causes you to suffer, well, then that brings on a whole different level of what's going on, right? And so speaking of the automatic nature of these thoughts and the automatic nature of our suffering, indeed, is the subject that I wanted to talk about today, right? The subject that I want to talk about today is what we call pet peeves. Now, for any of, I'm not sure how popular the notion of pet peeves are outside the U.S. I know it's a very American thing. It's something I learned when I was in high school as an English student, right? It was like I think it was part of like a vocabulary thing. The first time I heard this notion of pet peeves, maybe it was before high school. I don't really remember, but then it always struck me as very, very strange. So anyway, for my outside of the U.S. Friends and listeners out there, the concept of a pet peeve, right? Well, the concept of a peeve, right? Peeve is something that annoys us, right? Something that the word peeve itself can be synonymous with annoyance, right? And so the idea is that we have these things that always annoy us, right? Those really most common things that annoy us on a daily basis. Those are what we call our pet peeves. But the language behind this is so troubling, right? Because why would we ever befriend something that is so harmful to us, right? Like, why would we have a pet that is causing us suffering, right? And so the idea then is to, the idea of a pet peeve alone, right, is this thing that, again, like, people who drive slow always annoy me, right? Or people who are get the scratch off lottery tickets when I'm just trying to buy a bottle of milk. Those people always annoy me, right? Or robocalls or telemarketing calls, always annoy me, right? And so the thing is that very language of a pet peeve, right, is something that we're kind of nurturing these things that annoy us, right? We're holding them close. We're petting them. We're caring for them. We're nurturing them. We're creating life for them, right? And does that sound like something we really want to do, though, folks? Honestly, right? Like, does that seem a little counterintuitive, perhaps? I think it does, right? Like, why would we want more of those things that annoy us? And actually, the answer to that question is very, very logical. And it has nothing to do with us as, has nothing to do with somebody driving, has nothing to do with somebody buying lottery tickets or anything like that. It actually is a very, very simple and basic kind of concept of psychology, right? And that is, and this is something I've learned through my own studies and work of becoming a mindfulness practitioner and coach, right? Is that, and there's a fundamental aspect and trait of the human mind that's really important to understand, right? And that trait and that aspect of the human mind is that we always crave the familiar, right? Even if the familiar is something that is painful or causes us to suffer, we are always going to turn back towards that thing that is familiar, right? And so, or I shouldn't say the thing that's familiar, but it's the emotion that's familiar, and it's the thoughts that are familiar, and it's the automatic nature of these things that are familiar. And that's how we come to consider these pet peeves, right? So the idea is that, that when we're going through our life, right, every time we encounter something, right, when we always have that same reaction to that something. Now this can be, this can be brought on by the way that we were raised by our parents. Like, for instance, like if our parents were always annoyed at people who were driving slow on the road, well, then chances are you or whoever it is whose parents were doing that, you are also going to develop that tendency, right? Like that's something that is going to be a quality of your personality based on what you've experienced through your parents all those years, year after year after year after year, right? And so these things become kind of part of our personality, right? And so to be sure, those of us who have more pet peeves, right, are likely to be seen as people who are more irritable or more, more moody or just straight up more angry than other people, right? And the reason for this, right, is because every time we experience that thing, that slow driver, that person in front of us in a line who's going through 20 different lottery tickets to have the person check to see if they won, like every time we experience those things and we have that certain reaction, well, then what that does is that becomes part of our sort of operating system, if you will, right? It becomes part of our automatic, our unconscious behavior. Right. And so that's where, this notion that we always crave the familiar, right? Because we're always going to be kind of going back to that thing that is that automatic thing. Because, and the reason for this, and there is a very, very good reason for it, right, is that your brain, there's two things about your brain that are very important to understand as we do this work of mindfulness and as we start to figure out how to maintain our happiness in the face of things that are bothering us, right? If we want to get to that point, there's two really very helpful things to understand about the way the human brain works. Okay, number one, that your brain is very, very busy. Okay, your brain is going through, billions upon billions of points of data every single day. Just general thoughts, like just whole thoughts that you have every day is over 60,000 each day. Right? So your brain is a very, very busy thing, right? It's got a lot going on. So therefore, your brain wants to create, automated systems, if you will, right? It's just like, like picture, somebody at Amazon trying to process every order by hand, right? The only reason Amazon works, right, and the only reason Jeff Bezos is worth, I don't know, $200 billion or whatever it is, right? Whatever obscene number that is, right? But the only reason all of that works is because of the automation. Right, because that company is able to process a very high volume of transactions with a very low quantity of human interaction because everything is automated and things are robotic and things are, it's not somebody entering in your information every time you order something on Amazon Prime. It happens automatically and therefore it happens very quickly, right? And so that's what your brain is trying to do with, like, virtually if your brain could automate every single thing that you have to do every day, that wouldn't be enough for your brain. Like, that's truly the priority for your brain, right? And that's why it creates neural pathways, right? So that when something happens and you have this, this tendency to do a certain thing every time that happens. So for instance, every time you get stuck behind somebody on the highway who's driving too slow, your brain and your nervous system has a certain reaction to that, a certain automatic reaction to that. Okay. It's an automated process, right? And so therefore you have no control over it. Right? Unless you intentionally take control of it. And we'll get to that in 1 minute, right? But the idea is that your brain wants to create as many of these automated things that are happening because then it frees your brain up to do what it considers important, which is to process 60,000 thoughts a day and billions upon billions of points of impulse, points of input, stimulus, right, that's coming into your body through your five sensory organs. right? The second thing that is really important to understand about the brain is that even though it is, phenomenally complex, right? Like there's almost nothing else in the universe that is as complex as the human brain, right? The ability, in fact, the amount of potential synapses in your brain, right? And this is a crazy statistic, right? Really, really, it's just mind blowing statistic, right? That so I'm gonna get the math wrong, I think, but there's something like anyway, between the hundreds or tens of billions of I think it's like 40 billion neurons that make up the typical human brain, right? And each one of those neurons has 10,000 different points of connection that can make to all the other neurons in your brain, right? And so potentially, and I'm not saying that this happens in anybody's brain, but the potential, if you look at the permutation of the potential connections that can be made between all of your brain cells and all of the synapses, that's what's called the outer sort of ways in which you can connect to other neurons, right? The potential of all of those possible connections, right, is the number of potential possible connections of brain cells within your brain is higher than the amount of atoms in the known universe. That's how the math works, right? And it's staggering, right? Now, again, I want to be clear. That doesn't mean that all of our brains are making all of those connections. In fact, there's many neuroscientists who would say that it's just a theoretical idea. Like your brain could never possibly make all those connections, right? So, but the potential is literally more vast than the amount of atoms in the known universe, which is when I read that in one of Dr. Dan Siegel's books, it blew my mind. I was like, whoa, that is so powerful. That is a lot going on. But as much as, your brain is this incredibly complex organ that does so many different things on a moment to moment basis, right? And you're talking about a moment to the brain is like a 10,000th of a second or something like that, right? It's very, very quick, the way that it does all this work, right? And so even in all this complexity, right, your brain as a practical matter, your brain is really only worried about one thing and one thing only, right? And that is keeping this whole thing running. Right? Like that's the only thing that at the end of the day, through all of these different things that your brain does, that is really the only one that matters to it, right? Is that we keep the organism going, right? That the oxygen-rich blood keeps getting into the brain so that it can keep functioning, right? Now, it's worth noting right now that your organism can operate without your brain, but it cannot operate without your heart, and that's something we're going to get into later this week. But suffice to say that, again, your brain is extremely busy, but really its sole true desire or true concern is just that, is keeping you alive, right? Keeping your body functioning, right? And so therefore, what it knows, what your brain understands, is that everything that it has done up until this very second in time, this very millisecond in time, everything your brain has done, it has accomplished that stated goal of keeping you alive. And it knows that simply because you're alive, right? And so therefore, that's why your brain will do these automatic things and have these very same reactions to similar stimulus or stimuli, I should say, right? So for instance, again, when you're driving down the road, right, and you feel an anger arise in your chest every time you wind up behind someone who is driving slowly, that is your brain doing that because it thinks that's what's supposed to happen. Because every time you've been driving your car and behind somebody, you get that same familiar angry feeling, well, it's worked. It's worked. And so that's why we're doing it. Right. And so we crave this familiarity so much that we actually we actually befriend some of these difficult things that we encounter, right? We befriend our own stress in this sense by having these pet peeves, right? What that's saying is that because anytime you have a peeve, that is basically something that is a stressor, right? Like that could be synonymous, right? Anything that annoys you is something that causes your body to go into the stress response, right? So therefore, what we're literally doing is we're creating a pet out of our own stress. Now, if that doesn't seem counterintuitive, I don't know what is, right? So I'm just going to check my notes here for a second. So so the idea is that then what we're talking about here, sorry for stuttering here, what we're talking about here is basically an automatic reaction, right? And those are two important words, right? Automatic means that it happens on its own, and a reaction means that it happens very quickly, and it happens without contemplation, and it happens without any kind of weighing of any kind of pros and cons or anything like that. It just happens, right? And so when we have an automatic reaction to something, right, that is, and again, it's a synaptic thing that happens in your brain, right? Certain neurons fire with other neurons every time you experience someone who's scratching off lottery tickets or driving slow or popping their gum or whatever it is, that those things that annoy you, right? It's a certain neuronal reaction that's happening in your brain, right? And so the concept then, right, or the key to preventing the suffering, because at the end of the day, we don't really care, right? It doesn't matter if our brain reacts a certain way to a certain thing, except that it causes us to suffer, right? And so when I'm behind that person on the road and the person's driving too slow and it's annoying me, right? This is my pet peeve. Ooh, this really gets under my skin. I don't like this, right? Well, that is our brain, right? Saying that if I go into this stress response about this thing that's happening, that's how I'm going to survive this experience, right? So what happens then, though, right, is that we just go into a stress response, right? And the stress response, of course, doesn't have anything to do with the person driving ahead of us, right? It has to do with how we feel about that person driving ahead of us, right? And as we get into that stress response, though, right, what it does is it cuts off our ability to be present with the people and the events of our lives. And so therefore what it's doing is not only causing you stress and causing you to suffer on some level, but it is also preventing something that's very, very valuable and very, very important to all of us. And the thing that it's preventing is our happiness. Right. And so again, and it comes again with this concept that we have pet peeves, that we have these things that we, bother us so much that we love them and we care for them and we feed them and we nurture them. It's like we wonder why we're all stressed out the way we are if we're, kind of considering our stressors as pets, right? So the solution to this, I'm sure that's what you really want to know here, right? Because it's great to understand it, and as I said, in and of itself, it's not even that big a deal, right? That our brain does this and has these automatic reactions, except in the fact that it impacts our quality of life. It impacts our well-being. Right. And so the idea then is to, the solution, I should say, is to bring this automatic implicit thing that's happened, this activity in our brain and our body, to bring that from the implicit to the explicit, to bring it from the unconscious to the conscious, to bring it from the automatic to the intentional and deliberate, right? And this is done simply by paying attention to it. Right now, a lot of the work that I do in my coaching, right, relies on 4 very basic practices. Okay, the first is a formal meditation practice, right, which requires no more than 5 or 10 minutes a day, right? But just and I teach people how to do it. Most of my clients come to me without any single minute of meditation experience. Or actually, the most common person that I get to help is somebody who says, I've been using this app for the last couple of years, but I'm still really stressed. So that's where I teach them how to do, and I could teach you how to do a very simple self-guided meditation. Okay, so that's the first foundational practice. The second foundational practice is to simply pay attention to what we're doing. So what we do is we pick like one particular activity that we do every day. A lot of people pick things like brushing your teeth, taking out the garbage at night, brushing your hair in the morning, putting on moisturizer lotion, taking a shower, things like this, right? And simply just paying attention to those things as you're doing them, right? The third is to learn how to pause from time to time, right? To pause when you start feeling that feeling behind that person on the road. You take a moment, you say, what's going on really? What's happening here? What am I going through? Why is my body responding to this person who I have no idea who they are? I have no idea what they love, what they hate, what they like, what they don't. They might be if I met this person, there's just as much chance I could become their best friend as their worst enemy. That's literally how much I know about this person ahead of me in the car. But yet, this person's causing so much emotion in me. So where is that coming from? Right? And again, just paying attention to it is where we can find that answer, right? So the third practice then is to learn how to pause for just a few moments and check in with what's happening as it's happening. I almost made it through an entire episode without coughing today. Pardon me. It's this time of year. I get some weird winter allergies when the air gets real dry, so pardon me again. So the fourth practice then is compassion practices, and that's compassion for yourself and for others. And so that's, again, that plays into this too, right? Like compassion for yourself is to say, okay, I don't really want to feel the way I'm feeling right now, so I'm going to give myself the permission to do something to not feel this way, right? And compassion for others is to look at the person who's driving slow, or the person who's scratching off lottery tickets at the front of the line, or the person who's doing this or that's bothering us, right? Because most of the time it does have to do with somebody else in the world, right? Oh, it doesn't have to. I mean, you could have, your pet peeve could be rainy days or something like that, right? But a lot of times it does include the actions of the words or actions of another person. And so compassion allows us to see that person not as an annoyance, but as someone who is simply trying to be happy. They are simply trying to do the things that they believe are going to increase their level of happiness and decrease their level of suffering. It's that simple, right? So now, as we do these four practices, and again, I know I make it sound like a lot, but all together, you're talking about adding like 5 or 10 minutes to your day. That's it. Seriously. I can teach you how to do the rest of it as you're doing everything else you're doing, as you're driving, as you're scratching off lottery tickets, whatever it is you're doing, right? And so that's the key. And that's what I bring. That's the value I bring to this. But essentially, when we can practice all four of these or any combination of these four practices, what we do is we cultivate resilience, right? Like when we feel that anxiety rising in us from the pet peeve, right? That automatic sense of anxiety. Well, we can come back down from it when we can pay attention to it, right? We can be resilient. The next thing it can do, these practices will do, I should say, is to allow for a positive outlook, right? Allow for the fact that it's not that bad that this person's driving in front of me slowly, right? The third thing is we focus on our ability to pay attention, right? Because again, that's the key, right? To pay attention to what's happening, right? And then the fourth thing that this teaches us is how to use the power of our own generosity and altruism, right? Now, you might recall what these four things are. Maybe they sound a little familiar to you, right? Because almost in every one of the last 10 episodes or something, I've mentioned these are the four constituents of well-being that are brought to us by psychologists and neuroscientists who tell us that the extent to which we are able to be resilient, to have a positive outlook, to pay attention and to know where our attention is when we're not paying attention, and to be generous, those are the four constituents of well-being. right? So if we can address these pet peeves and avoid the automatic nature of the pet peeves and call our awareness to it, and in a non-judging and compassionate way, well, then generally speaking, what you're doing is you're making yourself more well. And with wellness comes happiness. With wellness comes productivity. With wellness comes better relationships. With wellness comes profit. Really just anything in your life anything that's going on in your life is going to be more beneficial and more enjoyable the more well you are. So if you'd like any information or any help on getting into some of these very simple practices, all you got to do is ask. Okay, so send a message, go to my website and book a call, or just leave a comment wherever you're watching this video, and I'll get in touch with you and we can have a conversation on how easy and simple these practices can be and how quickly you can get rid of some of those pet peeves that have been annoying you for your whole life. And you can learn to live without that stress and annoyance in your body because you don't need it. It's really not doing anything productive for you, and it's only bringing you more and more suffering. All right, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you have any questions, please comment, send me an email at art@artburnscoaching.com or go to artburnscoaching.com. There's lots of information there about all kinds of stuff that I talk about here, and you can also book a call to get in touch with me. All right, everybody, I wish you well, and I'll be back again tomorrow to talk more about the pet peeves and how we can kind of manage them. All right, and I got some really good practices for you tomorrow to talk about this, because essentially what these pet peeves are again part of our automatic sort of pattern-based behavior, and there's a way in which you can examine that pattern-based behavior, and in the examination of it you can evolve from it and to move past it and to gain control of your life and gain control of your happiness and your wellness and then your productivity and your profit and your good relationships and all the rest of it. And I would love to be part of I am honored to be part of the process that allows you to realize these beautiful, beautiful things. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. I'll be back again tomorrow. I wish you well.